welcome to this last day of our workshop. I'm still Ola Ostman from the University of Helsinki, and I've been asked to talk about aspects of social responsibility when you study language use. It's been a wonderful week, and I've been trying to accommodate as much as possible. But one of the things that I have noticed is that I am definitely not from an interrupting country and a culture. I like spontaneity, but this has been a little bit too much. I don't know how to butt in, because for me it's very impolite to break off. So if you ask a question, you will probably go on and ask for 2 hours, because I don't dare to interrupt you. So, but you are welcome to ask questions. Okay, so after all the things that we've seen, I wanted to add the Nordic perspective here, because there's so many things going on here that I have learned, and I'm eager to learn more about it. Then some of the things that I say will not probably be that exciting, but we'll see. You'll get another perspective. I'm trying to be my Nordic self. And I wanted to start with this, because I think that we haven't really talked about where you can get all the information that we're talking about. So we have, Jeff and myself are editing something that we call a Handbook of Pragmatics. It's also online. Unfortunately, your library will have to subscribe to it, but here you get everything you ever wanted and needed about anything. If you want to know what code switching is, if you want to know what adaptability is, just look it up here. We have articles of like 5 pages with lots of references where you find new things to sort of, well, I'll show you what I mean. I know this is a little bit out of the ordinary, but it's not the same as as you saw they put. No. So now you can go in here and look at the handbook that has general topics, traditions, scholars, methods, notational systems, whatever. Well, it's a wonderful thing. And so you see you have articles here that you can just press on, and you get a very interesting thing. Okay, but I won't say more about that, but please do remember that this is a way that we also think is an aspect of responsibility to offer you, future pragmaticists, proper tools for doing pragmatics. And in connection with the handbook, or at the same place, we also have IPRA's online bibliography of pragmatics that is constantly updated, as is the handbook. We produce, Jeff and me, 300 pages per year. We don't write them, we ask people to write. But so, and then if there's an article that isn't updated properly, we update it and get somebody to write a new one. So it's really a good tool, irrespective of who does it. Okay, good. I'm going to talk about responsibility, as I said, responsibility for languages, for language in the singular. I mean, the kinds of things that we do every day, language planning, editing, language editing, and taking into account all the globalization aspects, localization, variation, and so forth. Feeling responsible for teaching and knowing a lot about different named languages. So that's one thing, and you know what that is. You're responsible for your kids and so forth, your pupils and students. But I want to say something about the responsibility for languages. It's important to continue working to make people aware of the importance of minority languages, of all languages in the world, and because they carry minority cultures or cultures, and we also have to do this without sort of pushing away all these moral questions that are attached to it. So responsibility comes in here all the time. I want to, well, this is a little bit difficult. I don't know how to do it, but the whole idea is to get closer to some kind of equality of all individuals and groups of people. And I know this is a little bit maybe outdated or not, linking this up with biodiversity, but I still think it is an important aspect. Linguistic diversity is also important for us to have alternative solutions when things don't go the way they do. And I know that people say that, well, computers will take care of it, but they won't. I see that cultures are embedded in languages and languages are embedded in identities. We'll get back to that a little bit. So, arguments in favor of the importance of retaining a multitude is an important one. And I think it's particularly important these days when the sort of extremist right-wing movements hail the national romantic view of one folk, one country, one people, one language, I don't know, and using economy or economic arguments as the reason why they say that. So, you know this, I know, but I wanted to start off by referring to a thing that Michael Krauss said in 1992, that the coming century will see either the death or the doom of 90% of mankind's languages. According to Ethnologue, now there are about 7,000 something described languages, and there's a whole lot more. I'm inclined to say that there's about 12,000 languages, but people talk about 6,000, but Ethnologue already has over 7,000 there. There's a lot of languages there, but in 100 years maybe there's only 700 left. Maybe not. Maybe this is a negative idea about it, because we also know that new languages emerge all the time. We have sort of contact languages, and people find other ways of communicating that are also kind of will be languages in the future that we heard about with social media. But even if we do not adhere to a sort of strong version of any kind of Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, that I still want to say that, you know, as you know, if you know a lot of languages, it will give you several ways of dealing with things, with problems, with challenges, and also, of course, as you know, if you are bilingual, trilingual, and so forth, that will also enhance your general personal cognitive capacity, as research has shown. And so, I just this is a little bit of a programmatic thing, and I apologize, but as I said on Monday, I don't think we can sort of make a dividing line between, you know, pure description and prescription or normative, and think also as experts on language to say what we know or what we think we know about languages to make the world a better place. Taking responsibility for our joint future, working with native speakers, where the native speakers are of course in charge of that research, not us as coming from the outside. So I'm going to, well, I put in the revitalization, the vitalization of Finland-Swedish Sign Language that I was involved in. And Jeff said something about what he feels that he has done in life, and this is one of the things that I have done in life. I managed, the help of my students, to get Finland-Swedish Sign Language into Ethnologue, because it wasn't, and then we found out that, okay, somebody. And it's interesting with these sign language. In the 1960s, it was unsure or not, and then you fight together with bigger groups. Okay, our language, in this case Finnish Sign Language, needs to get a place, and you fight together, and then you bring in all the other dialects or the other forms of sign language under it, and it's only sort of 20, 30 years later you realize, but that's not my language. And then you can break away and say, okay, we're doing something very different from what you're doing ideologically. It's sign languages, but there are two sign languages in Finland, and that is what we now know, and we've had a couple of PhDs on that. So that's kind of work that you also should, as a linguist, be responsible for doing and working on. This is just what I want to say with Albert Crosby and Francis Carton, who worked a lot of these things, and they kind of just took from them basically talking about biodiversity, which I know one should. In 1492, when the sort of two worlds Well, some people thought they had found India and hadn't, but basically it altered, often simplifying the North America biotically, and Albert Crosby is an environmental person who has written about century, and then the passenger pigeon was the most numerous bird in North America, got extinct. The pigeon Martha died on the 1st, 1914. That was the last of it. So things in the sort of biodiversity sort of getting smaller and smaller, and the same thing happened, of course, with the native population, native peoples in North America. Sure, there were military, but also all the diseases that came with it that killed basically 90% of the Aboriginal population from 1492. We know that, but the cultural and linguistic simplification was radical, and we have to sort of keep that in mind, because when language dies and a population dies, they also bring with them or take with them understanding of. I asked you to read the article I wrote about what I call ethics and appropriation, just as well as being responsible. Appropriation, because I worked with the Wallapai a little bit, and here I just put up one of the things having to do with naming. This was the term that was used by the linguists coming in from the outside that was mentioning names. Then they started using Wallapai, that's the English word now for it, but they themselves either write Walbai or Walbai, and what I wanted to bring in there, it's a personal note about my sort of general dilemma when going into a field like this, and it's also an important thing for me, because it was when I not exactly, but I had the same issues, same challenges, same problems in my home village in Finland. So it was an eye-opener for me to sort of see to be done with sort of groups of people. And I won't say much about this, but it's a general dilemma. I'm just referring to Edward Sapir, who was the last Yahi that Sapir basically, wanted to get the language out of him before he died, and he did die. And later on, when we look at it, it wasn't all the thing that you should do to a human being. Okay, come with me, I'll take your language and work with you. Anyway, you can also understand then why many indigenous peoples don't want to give away their language to researchers who come in and want to say, how do you say this relative clause or whatnot? Because for many of them it is really an idea that you've taken everything else away from us. The only thing we have left is language. We're not going to give that to you. So you have to understand that position also. Well, this is just about naming, because naming of a language is also an act of power. And I put in wars, then it should also be able to establish peace or at least prevent war. So these are kind of, programmatic, expressing my feelings, whatnot. But I don't know whether you have any questions about this or things that came up when you read this, or if you read it, about the dilemma that you as academics are in. Or shall I just go on and see whether you have questions at the end? Or but anyway, keep that in mind. I don't see any hands, and you're supposed to interrupt, so I don't need to wait 5 minutes as I would have to do in Finland. Okay, now, well, here's just some other things about self-reflexivity also, because the idea of appropriation and having this dilemma when you go out and work with, well, with anybody really, has to do with the idea also of constantly monitoring and questioning what you as a scientist, you as a scholar, what you're doing, how you conduct interviews and so forth, how you set up and all the statistics we use and so forth, and as good things to say about life, so we shouldn't sort of say, I'm not going to read him or her. Keep in mind, just it's good to read everything. Read as much as Romney has, but you know, it's an important thing. I have a couple of spin-offs here. One is that Romney said something about that we need to maintain many different languages. And I was wondering if you have 22 scheduled languages. You're supposed to interrupt me now. Supposed to.
I wanted to mention two resources.
Yes.
One of which is contemporary, and it's done by a colleague here in Gujarat at the University of Vadodara. His name is G.N. Devi, and he's done a people's linguistic survey where he documents, and I think he says there are 900 languages.
Yeah.
So he's documenting through the people, through interaction, all these languages locally.
Yeah.
So that's one great effort. It follows Grierson's linguistic survey, about which we've all written and we know. So that's the early colonial survey, and there's a huge difference between Grierson's methods, which were very interesting, and Davies' methods. So that is the question about the 843 different languages. The scheduled languages in our constitution were, I think, 12 or 15, but they've already grown to 22 with the linguistic states. In addition, linguists in various states are documenting and attempting to produce narratives apart from Devi. So there is, and we have in Mysuru, the what is it? Central Institute of Indian Languages, which also does this. So we do document, but you realize it's an enormous task, and in which everybody must participate. But it's not as if we are blind, because lots of people have taken this up.
Yeah. But it's the reason I wanted to ask about this was because I understand also from my reading that it was a great achievement when Kangas and Philipson and people managed to sort of support the idea of getting, was it 12, 13, I don't know, languages in South Africa to get a specific status for them, and then many others, well, some other people felt that, well, what about the others? Because then they feel really not part of the scheduled languages. So this is a dilemma, again, an academic dilemma, in the sense that you want to help, and so you bring up some of them, but the more you bring up, then the more the ones that are not brought up are sort of thrashed upon. Yes, Dipti.
I just have a comment. It's that it's one thing for a linguist to record and do all that research, but the forces that kind of result in homogenization and the death of languages are outside linguistics or linguistic forces. So it's, movement, migration, capital, and all of that. So this trend is going to continue, and I just want your thoughts. What do you think, especially across the world, but in a country like India, it's going to be fewer and fewer languages that are in everyday life. So what are your thoughts on nurturing and keeping a language alive as opposed to just...
Yeah, well, Well, my point is that it is really the responsibility also of linguists not only to record and write grammars of them, although that is an important step to collect information, but we also have to be proactive and take responsibility and work with the people in order to sort of make them see the value of their own languages. I don't know, maybe they will die out, and that's what the general, that was Krauss was saying, but I think we should at least fight it, because I do think, or for me at least, every language carries a culture, and we don't want to lose that to be able to survive in this world. I don't know whether I can respond much more to that, but I have also would have to things that we do nowadays. Quite, I mean, styling is one of those things in linguistics that is very important, and we haven't really talked about it, but accepted by a group, you start speaking like that group or the people in that group, and sort of, there's a lot of people, youngsters, adolescents in adopted a sort of immigrant kind of language in order to be part of that way of living, and I was just wondering, and I think that's something that somebody should look at, and maybe somebody has, about to what extent is this also a kind of appropriation? You want to get into the group and you start behaving like them. At what stage are you accepted? Does it take sort of 5 years or 2 days or whatnot? You had a comment on that. Have you thought about this? Yes.
It's not linguistic, but that's why I'm thinking about a lot of people of a post-colonial pragmatics, because of course when you have a colonizing culture, you want to be accepted into that group because it's an elite group. And so there are lots of studies in historical studies and post-colonial studies about precisely this phenomenon of becoming a member of an in-group or an elite group and migration across languages.
But this goes the other way around.
Yes, the other way is also very much so, because with Grierson and others, you moved to recording the local languages, and which was very valuable in making people self-aware. But finally, it became an act of what one might call appropriation, and that particular word, appropriation, is very much central to the vocabulary of post-colonial studies. So that's why when they're talking about CDS is really, very much part of thinking about this self-consciousness. So building this boundary wall between linguistic pragmatics, notions of appropriation, and also CDS and post-colonial studies seems an endeavor which, we should all...
Jenny wants to say something.
Comment. I mean, in terms of the last one.
Yes.
And for the first two things. I mean, of course, Lebov's work in Language in the Inner City, a particular paper called The Importance of Being a Lame, exactly took up that point about when you become a member of an in-group. It was about the usage of African American English and people who, kids who controlled it and how it changed because what Lebov was interested in was linguistic change across geographic areas, and the fact that it could happen very, very quickly at a certain level of actually phonology, which is what he was interested in. I mean, found. But, the lame is the person. It's a term in those days for the kids who are on the outside of a group and were trying to get in. So it's actually, it's been looked at for a long time. And the way Lebov does it, because now Lebov is associated with a very deterministic, big number stuff. Variation theory is really about big number stuff now. But in fact, and lots of statistics in language study, but the early work was not. It was about style. I mean, and Judith Irvine, someone here knows Judith Irvine well. Judith Irvine has written quite a bit in her about style, where she exactly makes that point that early Lebov's was very important for that. Just thinking about that.
Yes, yes, and Lebov is still doing narrative analysis and things like that.
Yeah, but it's more about the styling and style that is important about Lebov.
Okay. But I wanted to say here that, I mean, there are certain things you don't refer to God or the Bible in these things, but I was also wondering whether the expression of hatred has become much more explicit than what it was 20 years ago, because I would like to know whether what we saw yesterday, is that what we are in for? Is that what will happen in the Nordic countries within like 5 or 10 years? Because nowadays, if you were to sort of put something like that on YouTube or someplace, there would be legal repercussions for it. People are very sensitive to these things that and the guy would be thrown in jail or whatnot straight away. So it's getting more and more acceptable in a way. So you seem as you wanted to say, no, okay. Yes, yes, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Mm. Mm. Yeah, yeah. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. It is really an important and issue, and on Monday I talked about not having to be tolerant towards the intolerant, and these are also things. I'm just throwing out these things because I do want you as linguists also to keep in mind that it is your responsibility to keep these things in mind. So good. Yes. There were, in the late 19th century, there was a big debate over whether the Swedish in Finland should be a language of its own or not. And there are differences, more or less the same kinds of differences as we have between Flemish and Dutch. So there are kind of dialects, and they want to keep it that way. And so nowadays we always follow what the Swedes in Sweden say one should do when we sort of say, well, how do you express something and so forth. So it's that debate surfaces now and then, but it was really fierce 100 years, 120, 30 years ago, but not anymore. At the moment it's just a matter of survival, really. Yeah. Also because we're on several places. We're not just in one place here, because you can see there's these people and these people and these people, and they are sort of geographically apart. Okay, I wanted to say also something about the dialects, because Rukmini said when we started all this that, well, I'm a dialectologist, and I am really, and we have a lot of dialects. These are the traditional dialects of Swedish in Finland, and this is where I come from, and this is where my wife comes from, and they're very, very different from each other. Somebody who speaks standard Finland Swedish does not understand the dialects. They always say, "Oh, we don't understand that." If you are a dialect speaker, you understand all dialects basically. So they are quite similar, or maybe it's just because I'm a linguist, but they are different. But what I wanted to say is that in the late 1960s, dialects, well, everybody was saying dialects are going to die out, so we don't need to do anything about them. But what happened then was something we talk about as late modernity reaching the Finnish countryside also, and Finland in general, with issues of democratization and conversationalization, all these sort of ending up in some kind of liquid modernity. And that's where we notice a kind of return of the importance of dialects, and people started to see we need to we don't, and it has very much to do with, this is what it looks nowadays. I just put up a thing here. We have some kind of Finland-Swedish standard, which really is a reading of the writing version. That's not really something that people spoke. We just sort of use it on the basis of what is done in Sweden, and well, pronounce things a little bit different. And then we have the dialects here, and we have the regional standard varieties, which is what's happening now, and then we have the town regional ones, which are not the same as these. So it's a little bit complicated. And then in some areas you watch Swedish TV all the time, and you go to Sweden to do things. But in the mid-1990s, when Finland joined the European Union, there were a lot of small-scale farmers that found that they can't live anymore. They have to find, or the sons and daughters had to get out of the place because they can't keep up anymore. Do you want me to take that? It doesn't matter. Okay, we'll see what happens. So and then you kind of rather than sort of these big things here are arrows are supposed to indicate the kind of leveling that we find all over the place, that the dialects are becoming the same and so forth. But that's not really what happened, because the dialects sort of made their own regional standards. You got schools being set up for bigger areas, and kids from different dialects came in there, and they created their own way of speaking, retaining certain features from the local dialects and making up a regional dialects, which are not the same as the regional things that were in the neighboring towns. So so it was sort of, you took a step from leveling to regionalization, and then the youngsters then starting to build up their own a new identity on the basis of that. We talked about, or you have talked about, writing systems, and people started writing. I mean, we've always written in the dialect, and there's always been theatrical performances in the dialect. But most of all, then the popular music sort of came in, and now with the CD sleeves, this is why we need CDs. You write the text for the songs, and I've been investigating these texts, that people, how they write down the dialect, and of course, as a linguist, I've also written a couple of things how you should do it, but of course they don't really care what I do, what I say, but it's a very, and the way they write things has changed, and really from a kind of modern to a sort of late modern to postmodern, and now we're kind of in a liquid modern society where the things don't really matter. And because it's the last day, I thought I'll show you what you do up in the countryside in Finland. So and you can, Dipti can say stop when you want me to stop. Well, because it's liquid, it just no, but I mean postmodern, I never used that because it hasn't really occurred. But liquid modernity, I think I'm taking that for, is that from Zygmunt Bauman? Yes, it's Bauman's term. That it's Zygmunt Bauman, yes. I don't know. Anything goes, basically. It's liquid, yes. I'm going to show you where I come from now. I'm going to be very, so this is the way it used to be in the 80s, 90s, you had covers of other things. I'm not going to. Okay, so these are the kinds of things that the sort of my generation or my parents' generations would love to hear. You have songs that were covers of famous things, and then they had text that had nothing to do with what the original text had. This has to do with a sort of rowing boat that is being painted blue and so forth, and they put them into the place where they are. Let's see now if I can do this. Then it should go there. But these days it's well, it went through different stages, and you got more and more sort of freer to express yourself in the songs, and the costumes and the way people wear, sort of youngsters, they changed. And this is kind of let's say this is as far as you go. They're crazy, but so okay, you get some sense of what's going on here, and these are things that the youngsters, especially in these areas, really like. I mean, they're crazy, but they're really good musicians. They all have a sort of classical training and so forth, and but they use the dialect to express all kinds of frustrations. And well, as you see, they can be really nasty, crazy, and so forth. If you want to watch more of them, I'll put them up here, and you'll get the slides at some point. But you don't have to go to the extreme. But there's one group that's called Kai. It's just the Kevin, Axel, and Jacob, who sort of started being a kind of humorous, but they have become so famous now, and everybody told them you can't get anywhere if you sing and do stuff in the dialect. And they said, well, this is what we want to do, and they are I would say they may be the most popular sort of group nowadays for youngsters in the dialect areas. There's just okay, but of course you can't appreciate this if you don't know the dialect. But they're talking about, and they make their own songs, and they talk about the situation of what it's like to live in the countryside, and sort of lift up the country, how lovely the places where they grew up, and it's sort of so the widest possible roads, and the very small places, and we have lots of things here. We have a shop, and well, we don't really have anything else, but anyway, it's they really, people love them, and they are now putting up a sort of a theatrical performance at one of the big Swedish language theatrical theaters that they call Gambemark, which means the old mark. It's a and we used to have mark before we took the euro, and now they're sort of talking about this group of people who sort of wanted to sort of create an independent community of their own. Yes. Yes. Oh, that's code switching. Yes, yes, definitely. Yeah. Now there's a lot of that, and then there's what's I wanted to sort of say also, because the now these are a little bit sort of provincial, if you want to, but now there are also cases where all the people from different parts of the Swedish language Finland have come together to sort of to fight for the rights of the Swedish language population. So this is a group, they just were put together. They call themselves Artists for Tolerance and Openness, where there's not, you might not sort of hear too much of the dialect, sort of dialectal features, but that's the point. So it's okay, you get the sense of it. It's important also to notice that, or to note that some of there were Finnish speakers there, and there were one was a Norwegian and so forth. So it's a kind of, it's called the thing is called our country, our time, and so forth. And by joining forces like this, they kind of made the standard Finland Swedish into the dialect of the whole community. So I just tried to put this; it didn't come out so nice, but traditionally the dialects have really high value, and then they went down because the standard was what it was supposed to be. And then with the EU, you got a kind of postmodern break that we want to, you know, do something different, as you saw with these crazy people who dance around, and then you gradually go down into something like the hip hop people. But now it's sort of convergence of the thing. We are one, and that's the way we can continue. So we are kind of speaking the dialect, but it's not really speaking the dialect in the sense of having the regional features that we used to have, but they're creating their own characteristics of what dialect should be. The dialect then is not tied to the space where the rural dialect has been spoken, but the dialect is a place of identity. And this is what I'll see. Okay, I'll come back to that a little bit. And I'm sorry, Jenny, if I bring in the construction of things, but it's important for me to sort of be able to talk about language, because, as I said, I'm a linguist, and I want to understand also how language comes in here. Yeah.
Years ago, because Catalan has gone down to being very much a small
Yeah.
regional dialect,
Yeah.
And, you know, it took the work of linguists who became the great heroes. At one point, it was the Catalan movement before it became so political that those linguists took the dialect and
Yeah.
worked on it and produced what then became, you know, the normative Catalan.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I'm wondering, you know, asking myself the whole time, that was going to be my question.
Well,
How does this parallel?
well, it doesn't really, because there's no power. I mean, we don't have a.
It took a long time in Catalonia.
Yeah. Yeah. But
You know,
what?
it's a very mixed bag.
Yeah.
There's some really big divides whether it's, you know, what kind of
What's now?
political mobilization
Yeah.
having a Catalan language should be is a really big
Most families nowadays, I would say, are bilingual in these areas, and that means also that Finnish is taking over. And I don't think there will be any kind of quest for independence, because it has been.
The Catalan example is becoming, in one way, that two languages can live side by side.
Yeah.
Because there's been, you know, a very interesting, it's very interesting in parallel. Anyway,
No, thank you. Yes, no, I agree.
you know, when does the politics come in? When does the politics of language come in to what is, I mean, what is the role, what you're just about to say, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
What is the role of the linguist in this creation?
Yeah.
Which what I'm talking about in terms, I mean, linguistic is carrying
Yeah.
its name.
Yeah. Well, there are. Yeah. There are lots of similarities in that sense, but there is also a sort of Swedish language university and so forth. Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to get into saying, when we get into these the convergence and whatnot, but that's why I started doing construction grammar, in the sense, because I felt that the constructions are the important thing. Those are the things that we have, the resources that we have access to. And if we take a sort of usage-based approach to things, and all varieties of language count. And so if we really want to learn more about language capacities and dimensions, then you can't just, well, it's just as important to talk about these things that Jeff also talked about, variability, adaptability, and so forth, as it is to figure out the traditional linguistic rules. So, of course, a sentence like Charles loves his car is neither more nor less important than a Whelerism like, "It all comes back to me now," said the captain as he spat into the wind. Which is not the same as the captain said, "It all comes back to me now," as he spat into the wind. That is not a Whelerism and can't function that. So just by changing the word order, it's just an unpleasant comment, seeing the captain spitting and the spit coming back. I mean, it's not a Whelerism anymore. So these are important types of language that we see, that we have as resources, and Whelerisms are very important in the community where I come from. The interplay between text and picture on a postcard is just as important as Charles and his car. There are subconsciously sort of implicit rules for how to write a postcard to your workplace. This is how everybody writes it, and they don't know that they follow these subconscious rules. I mean, of course, there are people, linguists, who want to break it, but this is the way you write it without knowing it. There are, you know, the text on a sign, on a painting, on a post box, they're all linguistic expressions with equal value. And if we want to understand humans and human nature better, we also need to look at these. And that's why we need something else than starting out from a positive, transitive, finite clause and saying that everything else are ellipses out of that. So that's why constructions are important. Okay, all of this is language. So, okay, this just says that we have to take responsibility for all these concepts, and that's why I wanted to do it on Monday. And also to see issues of responsibility as potential, well, as a tertium comparationis among other concepts, and maybe realize that that's an important concept. I was struck when Jenny talked about the map of the world without utopia has no place at all. I looked it up. Well, no. Well, this is what Oscar Wilde said: a map of the world that does not include you is not worth even glancing at. But you said it has no place at all, and I really love the. No, well, you said at one point that it has no place at all, and I love that. So please let me pretend that you said it, because it is. Okay, we'll check it. But okay. But the thing is that my point is that a map of the world that's a sort of deals with spaces and longitude, latitude things, but you also need to have places, imagine places there. And I also was thinking of what Jeff said about language use in the public sphere, where you said that the public sphere is a space of publicly accessible meaning. And I would, of course, like to say that it's a place of publicly accessible meaning. Okay, but the whole idea of having the distinction there between space and place, I feel, is really important. I mean, this goes, of course, back to Anderson's imagined community and so forth, but it's a very hot idea, topic that people talk about if you want to get into sociolinguistics today. So I'm going to take you into my little village a little bit more. I'm sorry for being like this, talking about myself and my village, but what? Okay, depends. Everything is new. Yes, question?
So, it's a very stray comment and maybe it does not make any sense, but I want to ask you, how did you get to this term of responsibility? Simply because when I was thinking to myself, right, human beings in general like to have positive emotions that are not burdensome, and they like to be kind of active but to work in life without a kind of burden on their shoulders. So responsibility comes with this connotation of having a certain job to perform. So and that's the starting place of all your research. So did you look at other things like joy or any things like that? How did you get to this place, basically? And why this as opposed to anything else?
Well, this is something that people have pointed out to me for the last 20 or so years, that responsibility has this negative thing attached to it. I'm trying to say it doesn't have to have that. I mean, the feeling that you have to perform, be ethical, that you have to do good things and so forth, that's for me responsibility. Maybe I should use accountability, maybe I should use something else, but I don't see it as a negative or as a thing on your shoulder all the way that you have to feel bad for being alive. I mean, this is what we have as a feeling. I would like to think that everybody feels that they are responsible for other people, for nature, for everything, and that needs to be also lifted up and made into something, well, that we can use as a tool. Rukminis looked as if okay. Okay, well, you break and when you feel that I don't want to. But I wanted to sort of say something about the place and space, because one day suddenly people had put up these signs it's supposed to be Bavas Hörne in my village, where they had these post boxes, and we still don't know who put it up, and there's another one 300 meters away, Klokkarsgården, and they sort of and of course I came there and saw these things and said, what is this? For whom is this? Is this a touristy thing? We don't ever get tourists. But then I started sort of thinking that, okay, these are the traditional unofficial names that people use, people who live in the real vicinity of these post boxes, and the people who go and pick up their mail there, but nobody else knows them. And but it was an interesting thing. It has all kinds of different functions, and indicate a kind of belonging to a particular space, and they create a place in that sense. And this is what I said about place and space now to make it easy. And I also think, again, Rukmini's, when he talk about Said's Orientalism and the different conceptions of Orient, also I see as different places, and your different kinds of bodies I see as different places. So you can use this concept in different ways if you want to. But it was again for me an expression of globalization and regionalization rather than leveling, that you're doing something from below and so forth. But the next summer when I came there to visit my friends, this idea of having signs on mailboxes got institutionalized. The village council had put up signs all over the village and said, okay, that's a nice thing. And of course, what was initially a sort of what we in linguistic landscape theory method talk about bottom-up signage became a top-down signage, that you somebody else decides what signs should be there. So these are the kinds of things that then came in. So I talked to the guy who was responsible for doing this, and turned out that he was also responsible for coordinating the sales of building sites in the village, and the village sort of made this into a profitable kind of thing. And there's many more things behind there. But so then they tried to sort of bring in the dialect in a very leveled form into the standard on the signs, not doing it the sort of regionalized form that it was that it started out from. And it was a kind of, again, appropriation, because the village council took over the right to speak for all villages without having been given that right. And I call this a self-intervention. It's a kind of thing that you get an appropriation from within the group, and you can justify the fact that you can do this because you can say, I'm a member of the group, therefore I can do all these things, but you don't really have the right to do it. So I don't know whether that term is needed or not, but I needed it for this thing anyway. So you get a kind of battle for the village, and choosing the correct name is really a struggle for power, in the same way as politicians' choices of different linguistic strategies are struggles for power, really. And it has to do with who is really responsible for the village, and for the village as the place one belongs to. Okay, I could stop here now. There were a couple of things that had come up over the week here. The couple of methods that I thought that maybe you're familiar with, but I wanted to sort of bring that in. Can I just do it? I'll do it very quickly. I promise. But one was the pragmatic collocations. The other, the matched guys. And I'll just, in case you don't know what it is, because I think both of these are really important. The match guys, for instance, you remember we had this picture of the explicit and the implicit, and there's also something that we call socio-conscious attitudes, but I don't need to get into that. This is research done basically by Leila Matfolk, and we had a lot of informants from all over Swedish language Finland, 3 different sets of information, trying to find out attitudes about what people think about the fact that there are, or about the idea that there are English words in Swedish in Finland today. One question was, do people use too many English words? And the other one, do we need to create new Swedish words to replace the English words? And in an opinion poll that we did with 500 respondents, and then we did also focus group interviews, questionnaires, and discourse analysis of the thing. And one of the things that we found then was, okay, in the opinion polls and the deep interview, so here is, for instance, the results that yes, we do need to sort of create new Swedish words, and even here even stronger, we do need to create Swedish words, we don't want the English words. Okay, so if you just leave it at that, we get the idea, okay, the Swedish language population in Finland is very puristic, they want to have Swedish words and nothing else. But that's the kind of opinions that they say they do, and that's why we need to get below that. That's why we need to get at the implicit attitudes behind the whole thing. So we made a match guys test where we had 5 texts being read out, and 2 of them were read by the same person. Again, we had 600 informants. Individually, we traveled around some 600 interviews. Okay, but and we used a sort of semantic differential scale, 7-point scale, and the character traits like ambitious, intelligent, independent, and so forth. And the idea was that we played these texts and we asked people to say, okay, well, we actually said that these are people who are interviewing for a job on the local or on the national radio. We would like to know what you think about them, who would be a good person for this. And so we asked them for every reading of the text. We had 5 readings, and then we asked them, do you think that this person sounds ambitious, intelligent, independent, and so forth? And as I said, 2 of them were read by the same person, and then there were 3 others, and we didn't do anything with them. They were just there to distract people. So we have the Swedish guys here. We use the word like nätet, and here we have internet. Here we have e-post, email, nätförlorare, netloser, and so forth, hemsida, website. So we just had a number of English words read by exactly the same person, otherwise no problem. And then they, of course, didn't know it was the same person because there were other people there too. And then we can see what their responses were. And here is just briefly what you find. And so if you, I don't know whether you can see this. This is the English text, these ones here, and this is the Swedish one by the same person. And so we find that, especially in the case of efficiency and interesting, they find that the person who read the text, yes, with a little bit more English, was much more interesting, much more efficient, and also the ambitious and independence were also almost statistically significant. So then we get a different view of what their implicit attitudes really were, and this is a very strong way of doing things. So we have the conscious explicit opinions. They're pretty negative to loanwords from English, whereas the subconscious implicit attitudes they're very positive too. And that's why you need to do these things, because, as I said, it's the implicit attitudes that really are part of changing the language. I'm going to stop here, but I'll just show you very briefly the other thing that well, we need to make a distinction between explicit and implicit, as I said, and so forth. And I wanted to also say something about collocations. It's a little bit different from the normal thing, maybe. I looked at some newspapers and stuff, and you know, typically when you look at collocations, you find things, for instance, here that convince and need, convinced of the need for far-reaching, convince all the people of the need for self-action. You find that convince and need seem to go together. And sometimes when you don't find it, you sort of say, okay, that's interesting, but see if I had that, yes, but then you find, okay, I'm convinced that blah, 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 and you get the need for some other points. So the idea of looking at collocations just as sort of 5 words to the right and 5 words to the left, sort of syntagmatically, has also to be changed a little bit, because there are these prototypical ideas that you just look at nouns and verbs and adjectives. There's no reason to do that, and also punctuation marks are sort of taken as boundaries for it. No, if you want to get at a sort of deeper understanding of things, then you can't do that. So this is just I looked at words like well, this is just for propaganda and so forth. These are the kinds of things that you find in a quick and a keyword in context concordance, whipped up by his propaganda machine and so forth, and you get this is where the word propaganda means, and these are the 5 most frequent words to the left and 5 most frequent words to the right, and so forth. And then you have a summary of the collocates. So for manipulation and for persuasion, you find these as the collocates, and so they're a little bit different, but what I want, and then you can sort of say, okay, propaganda has some explicit collocations, like, okay, you only use it when you talk about Soviet, Nazi, and so forth, or communist, and so forth. Then there are these implicit collocations, that collocations collocate with the word. I mean, propaganda collocates with the word propaganda. You can talk about propaganda when you're talking about propaganda. They sort of, when you talk about it. And also some other things like negative things like against and but and so forth, war, coup, and so forth. Manipulation comes in, of course, with the explicit things about economy and society, but also implicitly you have things like fraud, allegation, accused, and so forth. So that's kind of collocates with the words in a frame that suggests a strong negative involvement. So not to look at it from that point of view. And also the final thing is about manipulate, and this was really interesting. If you look at it, generally say, okay, this is where manipulate comes, and the words to the left and to the right, and you find often here all over the place, and you say, well, you're not supposed to sort of talk about that if you do an ordinary sort of collocation things. And so these are things that you shouldn't throw out. But why do you talk about often when you talk about manipulation? And then you have your theories about that and so forth. You see what I'm saying? It's not just the propositional words. Okay, so they occur a little bit here and there, and you can't say more specifically that, but that means that it can be used strategically. Okay, maybe I... okay, I'll just end end here. So I had this picture at some point because I want to make the distinction between these three levels: propaganda, persuasion, and manipulation. That they. No, I want to say one more slide too, and then it's fine, and then we can go back to it if you want. But I want you to leave it with it, because this is the important thing that I want to say now. Because as Jeff said about explicit and implicit, the words propaganda, manipulation, persuasion, they are of course explicit, but we want to find the implicit ways of persuasion, of persuading. So when we found words that typically collocate with propaganda, then we can see that these collocating words, they have a potential, an implicit for being propaganda words, because they tend to occur together with the word propaganda. So the next step then is to analyze how these words are used, how they function in different types of discourse, and then we get at some other kinds of implicitness. Okay, so these were just things that I wouldn't, that I'm not going to say anything about, but they were interesting, and we can talk about them because this had to do with the audience design, and I was a little bit worried about that also. That yes, intended audience, but how far can we take this, especially in the connection of Me Too and so forth? I mean, you can always say, well, at that time we didn't think of these things, but you can't use it. You do have a choice. And Jenny, I was thinking about, in reference to teenage girls learning how to debate, and you asked, is this emancipating, bringing women into the public sphere, or is it imposing a constructed standard on them? And in some cases, it really is you just take on the things that men do, but in other cases, like the Sara Danius, the secretary of the Swedish Academy, took up things that nobody had dared to say about the things that happen in the Swedish Academy that give out the Nobel Prize, and there you really, so in some cases you do kind of let yourself be imposed by the other standard, but in other cases you can really break through and so forth. Yes, again I put up the programmatic and Nordic perspective here, but I want now to talk a little bit about something that might not be of relevance to you as students now, but it will become relevant when you got your professorships and when you are working, as some of you already are, because it has to do with how to institutionalize these things. So I think that this is also a very important aspect of how you take responsibility for education in the social sciences and in the humanities in higher education. And again, I would like to stress the importance of retaining my minority languages, and also as when you publish and when you do something, you don't only do it in English. There's nothing wrong with English, but you cannot only do it that way. So I've been working quite a lot also within administration and so forth, trying to figure out a way of making the sort of language policy for and language strategies for the University of Helsinki when I was there, and and what we came up with then was to sort of, well, okay, you have to realize that the University of Helsinki, which is the best university in Finland, which is ranked always something between 50 and 90 in different depending on where you are, so it's a good university, and they do everything to keep it high. Among other things, they just sack people so to get better better figures. And so this was supposed to be a satirical comment, because that's what they do. If you don't, it's a way to get better figures ratio between teachers and students if you throw out 1,000 teachers suddenly, which is what happened at University of Helsinki. Now they're typing me, but anyway. So that's not a good thing to do, and it's happened elsewhere. But we wanted also, because of the situation that I've talked about, we wanted to retain University of Helsinki as a bilingual university with Finnish and Swedish as the two languages, at the same time accepting, of course, that English is what everything happens in, or many things happen in. So we wanted to draw up a sort of some kind of a document that says that it should be a trilingual university. And if you, we're not going to go through this, but I think, well, I'm pretty happy about this, because I worked on it for many years, and I was the chair of the organization and so forth, and who put together and wrote these things, and it's now, okay, now it jumped to the other side, but this is of course also the strategy, and the policy is also in 3 languages, and we're trying to sort of also say how you should implement this in teaching, in research, in the everyday services, and talking about language skills of the staff and so forth. So if you're interested in these kinds of things, I would strongly recommend that you have a look at what we finally ended up doing. Because well, okay, but I'm not going to go through that, of course, but we also wanted to, Rukmini talked about a 3-language formula. I don't know, is that the sort of thing that you have in India? And that's of course what the EU also wants to say, that everybody should know at least 3 languages, you know, and so for Finns in Finland, that's okay. We have Finland, Swedish and English, and we don't need to worry about it too much. Except if you're like my parents, who only have the dialect. But we ended up then suggesting something that we call parallel language use, that I misspelled here. But and that's what this is something you shouldn't see. But I really, because of what I've said so far, I'm not in favor of English as a lingua franca. I apologize. But for me, again, this is a question of ecology, question of human survival. I still think that language and culture go hand in hand, and I don't like these new trends within translanguaging, where some people say you shouldn't even talk about named languages like English and Hindi and Swedish anymore, that everything is a blur, is a liquid or whatever. And I don't see that that's going anywhere. Li Wei, who I respect highly and so forth, but he talked just a couple of weeks ago at another conference about how going through Fishman's language maintenance and language. Sorry.
Language loyalty and language.
No, language maintenance and what is it called? But anyway, so he said, well, you don't have to maintain languages, and therefore you don't have to change language because it's all translanguaging nowadays. So it was sort of, I'm misquoting here, I'm sure, but I mean, I don't like that trend. So of course I realized that there is a requirement for some kind of super diversity. Well, at least that's one way of seeing it, but there are, as I've just shown, counter movements of globalization, regionalization that come from below, and that's also where I see new languages appearing. So I don't think it's as bad as Krauss said, really. I do think we find new ways of expressing our feelings and ideas and whatnot. Okay, so the parallel language use is something that we worked on then in the Nordic universities, and now you know the Nordic universities, what I mean by that, as a tool in higher education, kind of as an alternative to allowing English to take over completely. And it's basically, very simply put, that all languages in a domain has to have equal value, and you decide on the basis of what is appropriate in a particular situation, what language to use. I don't know whether this is something that's can be enforced here, but in Finland at least, receptive multilingualism, also a type of parallel language use, that is, I speak Swedish, somebody else speaks Finnish, somebody else speaks English, and we all kind of understand it, and that's how conversation goes within the University of Helsinki. You don't have to translate, and you don't have to administrative decisions and so forth. They always go in 3 languages, and nobody really cares what language you speak. So that's one way also to do it, if we can agree beforehand that that's what we're going to do. So this is then what we wrote this sort of huge book kind of thing about what the situation is like in the different universities around the Nordic countries, and then we had the sort of recommendations that I asked you to have a look at for the and it's of course this is in Danish, the title here, but it has to do with the best practices for parallel language use at the Nordic universities. And we also went around and interviewed people in other places in Europe. So I wanted you then to have a look at this. I don't know whether you have had a look at it, but I would like to know whether something like this can be, is that what's happened also in here? All of these, every language, every university has a language policy where all these things are spelled out. Okay. 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 Is that a good situation?
This is quite nice because the universities are important.
Yes. And it is important also, I think, if you want to go up on the ranks and things, that you have these things in and not, because if you make it yourself, and if the people who are responsible for working in the university make it up themselves, then different kinds of decisions are being made than if it is made centrally, because the more central it is, the more politicians are involved, and that's not always the good thing. Do you have language policy committees at every university? People who sort of see to it that the policies are enforced and followed and so forth? We talk about them as troops that come riding in if there's problems and say, oh, the signage there is not good, you have to change it. They don't have horses. It's just the thing. Do you have language centers? Yes. Okay. Yes. Okay. Language lab. Yes. Okay. Well, this is the problem. They usually, very often, give basic courses in English or give courses in Spanish and so forth. But we're trying to say in this document that there are other things that should be done. And then this is interesting because we had a lot of talk about that, because if we take in people from who are supposed to teach, say, in linguistics, and they have English as their mother tongue and whatnot, then the university should offer courses for them. And we tried also to sort of say this is part of their teaching load, to learn the language, because otherwise it doesn't work. That you say, well, you have to learn the language, but nobody does because you don't get paid for it. So if you can say that, well, it's part of what you should be doing, and you don't have to then teach so much. I don't know. Well, well, as you know, if you don't know the local language, then you're not, you don't take part in the administrative discussions and so forth. So you. And you had just a limited time to learn it, and you had to learn spoken Catalan and good written Catalan, and you had examinations in both. Yeah. And you were able to go, the system progressed in the spoken, but you couldn't have the official ranking if you hadn't passed the written Catalan. Well, in Finland you won't, if you are a, if you, if you're a Finnish citizen, you have to know both Finnish and Swedish sort of 100% in order to get a job at university, and that is tested by in the Ministry of whatever it's called, legal law. What's it called, juries, and you have these tests once a month. They cost a lot, and you can get all kinds of stupid things to do, and they typically fail you. But if you come from abroad, then there are no such things, because coming from abroad means that you bring something new with you, and then so the universities have to take care of it. What? Yes, I'm just, but I don't know whether you want to. This is a little bit on the side of what you normally do, so I can understand if you don't have anything to say about it. But I wanted to put it up so you can have a look at it when all of you become famous professors and need to make language. And it's also, I think it's good to know what's being done elsewhere, because your situation is much more varied and much more problematic, maybe because different languages, but it's good to see what other universities have done. That's why I wanted to sort of force you to click on this when I send the the slides to you. So I don't know whether you, yes, you.
Language policies in the university using the local languages, it would be very problematic, because there are people who are speaking these regional languages, but they don't want their children to learn, number one. And even if they are fighting to get these languages for being a scheduled language or
Just to wake you up, I'm not doing anything.
yeah, and where am I forgot. Even they are fighting for these languages to be the part of the scheduled languages. So there was a case in northeast languages, I think Meitei or some other languages. So the people, they stopped their children to go to the school because they wanted Meitei to be the regional language, or to be the part of the education system in their region. And those people were the only, after Meitei was considered as the scheduled 22 languages after so many of struggle, fights and debates, and these people were the only who stopped talking these languages, the regional languages, Meitei, and they send their children to the English medium school. They don't so there are like lots of reasons, and then there are you won't even get the scholars, professor or teachers who can teach you in these regional languages also. And there are like lots of other reasons. There are no resources, no literature that will help the students to get to learn in these languages. So there is not only one problem like in India, there are lots of other problems also in India if we are trying to include this language policy committee or language policy thing.
I yeah, no, I totally. Yeah. I know that this is a problem, and it is a problem all over the world, and that's what I'm trying to say. I know I am programmatic. I'm a sort of person who thinks that there is an alternative to what's going on now. I want to tell you that there is alternatives. I want to say that at least there are other people around the world who try to also enforce this and get the local languages into university education. And if people like you don't do it, then nobody will do it. If you don't go back home and say it's okay to have some courses in Hindi and so forth, you start slowly. I'm not saying that, because of course I realize that if you do not use English, it will be very difficult to get published, to get ahead and so forth. But that doesn't mean that you should sort of completely forget your language, because one day it will be important. And I think it's important for you to sort of, as young scholars who sort of getting trained, to sort of see how people from the outside look at you maybe. I don't know whether I should say this, but I mean, we see that there are all these languages, say the 22 scheduled languages, and I would like to see how education is carried out also in some of these. And I know it will be difficult, and I know that probably English will take over, but I would like you to at least consider that there are some courses that can be given in a local language just to keep up, because I don't know how it is in India, but at least where I come from, the people who pay for the university are the everyday people. Maybe you have other people paying for people. So taxes and things go to the upkeep of universities, and therefore it is your responsibility to give something back to the society for the money that hardworking people put into taxes in order to let you study. And well, you know. But yes, okay.
One thing I noticed while I was in JNU, that there I saw that for people who were coming from a non-Hindi belt, there were remedial classes for teaching them Hindi. And it was a voluntary course. Anyone who wanted to join could join. But I pitched the same idea in my current institute for at least, making us acquainted with Telugu, that is the local language there. But it was not taken with the same spirit. So it's not like there are places which are trying to work in this, not exactly rigorously in this way, but at least in some fashion, because for the, for the obvious intensity of the complication that we have. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So, but this was just a reminder that we also have a responsibility for, as scholars, to sort of, take responsibility for languages. That's what I've been trying to say all the time. But okay, let's move on. And These are just some of the points having to do with parallel language use, which is what we're sort of trying to enforce, or say this would be a better way, and it has to do with all kinds of research, publications, presentations, should also, and we're trying to say that yes, we realize that you shouldn't publish a lot in, say, some local language, but just an abstract or something. You have to feel that responsibility to tell people what you're doing, even if it's one line or whatnot, something, so that people also will feel that that's okay, that's good, I know what's going on. And of course it will be difficult if it's very technical issues, but the parallel language scenario says that no, it doesn't matter whether it is science, technology, economics or mathematics or whatever, mechanics, also of course in the as Rukmini said, the leave things about the liberal arts and social science and humanities basically. And this is what I just said now, the twofold responsibility of scholarly research. Advancement of science, yes, in order to climb on the whatever list you aspire to climb on, but also towards the general tax-paying public. Again, I've said these, what responsibility you have. And okay, also it cannot just be a reaction against English. I mean, English is important, especially here, but also in all communities. Lots of things happening in English, so it's not a matter of sort of closing the door to English, but it has to be integrated, and you do these in parallel, basically. Okay. So, and then I just said, put up some of the other things that I think are important. Yes? Yeah, okay. Well, these are just things that I'm... Yes?
About science, the whole issue of publication in science. In main, here we go again. I mean, in main standard languages, yes, but I'm wondering if there is a big problem about genre differences. There's quite a bit of work, and I think the Swedish got rather excited. What is her name? The woman. But oh God, I'll think of it. I know, but there's a woman who's particularly keen on a guy in my department called Charles Baselman, who did a lot of work on the history of the development of the genre of scientific writing in English. And the name is Gunnarsson. Her name is Gunnarsson, but that's it. Because the issue of, in the sciences, creating, it would require a whole new set of language terms. I mean, would require an amazing amount of work to create. I mean, remember again, parallels, everybody knows it, the parallels in when there were to be two languages and they were supposed to be two standard languages in Quebec. The francophonization of languages of scientific and public life in Quebec. So it's even more of a problem, surely. That's asking an amazing amount, but it might be a way of saying that everything doesn't have to be published in English.
Yeah. And of course, I mean, it's one thing to get them into the language policy documents, and then it's another thing to get anybody to care about the policy documents. So, but as soon as you get the rector or chancellor or whatever you have in your university to sign it, then you at least have a signed approval that this is what we should do. It unfortunately doesn't work because there are people like me who are very active in these things. I left for Sweden, and then nothing happens with Swedish anymore in Finland, at the university, in my university. But I mean, those are crazy things. But yes, but then you have a document and you have other people taking over. Okay, but it says here, and then you can start to sort of question what's happening. Okay, these are just some of the other things that that we can. It's actually, well, it also has the responsibility to your students, but of course you know that. But just keep it in mind. It is important that whatever you do, it's not just for your own to get higher up and get a professor. You have immense responsibility for your students when you are a professor or a teacher. And I was talking this morning with Dipti about the sort of the being supervising PhD student. It's like sort of adopting the student and not throwing him or her out before he or she is ready for life. That's how we do it. That's how, I mean, you sort of 110% spend your life on seeing to it that that person gets all the information I have in order to take over afterwards. Okay, but this last thing I also wanted to say something about, because we all know about fake news and falsified research results and so forth that are problematic. But I want to say that don't throw out possible babies with the bathwater in the humanities, because in the humanities it is very important to stake out different understandings. I mean, pragmatics itself was one of those things that I was not allowed to do when I grew up. When I was doing my PhD, well, doing my MA and so forth, people said, no, that's not science. So we have to also work for this. And no, this is important. And gradually you get it. And now pragmatics is acceptable all over the world, of course. But also different understandings. It's very easy to, I mean, you all people sit in their little rooms or little corners and they say, this is the way to do linguistics. And if you see somebody else doing it a little bit different, you sort of put things on Facebook or whatever and say, this is stupid, and you get lists of stupid research and so forth. Don't throw out all the sort of seemingly crazy ideas that people put forth. You say, okay, this is not where we're going now, but it's a possible idea, especially in humanities where understandings is the important, not the truth, I think. So this is basically that, yes, there are power struggles, but the important thing is to find this balance between just doing what everybody else has done and applying what everybody else has done to your language, to Hindi or whatnot, or then taking your field a step forward in order to do something revolutionary. And this is basic simplicity, but this is important. Remember that you shouldn't make too bold jumps or take too long strides in one go, because your own group will denounce you. You can't sort of say go too far in one stride, because then people say that's crazy. You have to sort of say, okay, I know where I want to go with this, but I'm just going to take a little step now, and then maybe if they accept that, I can take the next one and so forth. Don't say, no, I think we should see the world in a very different view, and then you jump to the other side and people will say he's crazy. We won't ever read his articles anymore. So these are really important sort of issues that you kind of have to be aware of, the power struggles also in your disciplines. Anyway, the even more general, the linguist's responsibilities in the world. We, Jeff and I and Michael Mervis, did something about 20 years ago, trying to, well, enhance peace, prevent conflict and whatnot, and we call this the International Communication Monitor Initiative. Because the thing is that taking responsibility, I mean, responsibility, the good thing with responsibility is that it requires an agent. It's not just there as a static thing. So that's why I like responsibility. You always have to ask who's responsible, not bringing in the negative aspects of it. So that's okay, but in order to really try to make the world a better place, somebody else has to give you that responsibility to do so, give you the trust that's needed in order for us as linguists to be able to take that responsibility. We have to receive responsibility, and that's much more difficult. But that's kind of what we do in our everyday work when we language, you know, read other people's papers and plan stuff, and then when we teach. And also the thing about the University of Helsinki language policy, I was given that responsibility and I took it and we worked on it for several years, and that was great, I think. And the same thing with the Nordic Council of Ministers, who gave us the responsibility to come up with a solution to sort of keep the local languages at universities, even though English is coming in and being sort of the thing that everybody uses. And so we suggested parallel language use. At least you should try. So irrespective then of how much one would want to take responsibility of things, make the world a better place, it won't be successful unless somebody gives you the necessary authority and responsibility and tools for doing that. And the reason I'm saying this is that in 2001, 2002, was it two? Well, around 2000, I can't remember really. At the Royal Flemish Academy of Belgium for Science and the Arts, I was there, and Jeff was there, and together also with Michael Melvis, who was Jeff's PhD. Well, he had finished his PhD, I think, or anyway. We came up with a suggestion that we called the International Communication Monitor. We even published a thing in the Academy's series for that. That was March 2001, so this should have been 2000 to 2001. But anyway, so we really wanted to make a difference. It was a little bit of a pretentious project, I see. Hey, here maybe a little bit of even more than pretentious, but we had a great constellation of excellent scholars that backed us up. All of them active scholars at the time. We had Zygmunt Bauman, we had Pierre Bourdieu, we had Umberto Eco, Julia Kristeva, Robin Lakoff, Laura Nader, Edward Said, John Thompson, Georg Henrik von Wright. All these people said, okay, that's a good idea. And we even had Desmond Tutu as our honorary member in the board. Yes, Jeff laughs also at the moment. We thought we could change the world with the help of scientific research. And so we took this quite seriously, and you have to realize that this was before the sort of social media explosion 20 years ago, but we saw that how different media in different countries on different continents reported very differently on what was going on in the world. And so we wanted to establish a body, a troop of people writing in again that would sort of monitor what's going on. And monitor is of course a bad and negative word, but we just wanted to sort of monitor the flows of communication that had to do with international and supranational affairs, follow up ongoing developments in international communication via, and this is scientific scholarly analysis, discourse analysis, pragmatic analysis, and so forth, which would then lead to research-based diagnosis of processes of communication about and pertinent to international and supranational relationships. That's from what we wrote and what you've all read, so I don't need to say it anymore. But we wanted to find a way to collect data and information in a research-based fashion that would help us in this endeavor, and to be an alternative research-based peace initiative. We wanted to show that scholarly knowledge of language and communication has an important role to play in any peace initiative. We were young, but we still think this was a good idea. my point is, despite several attempts, we were not able to get funding for this. We were not funding to get it not possible to get funding for it as a solely research-based undertaking. There were people, there were organizations who would have loved to do it if it was sort of put under their name, but that would of course have defeated our precise goal of keeping this a scholarly thing. So the point is that if you talk about responsibility, it's not only an agent that takes responsibility. The person who does it also has to be a benefactor, a receiver of responsibility tasks, and that's much more difficult. But this was a task that I gave you then because I wanted, as an example of this, I wanted you to think about, for instance, the train accident last week. How was that reported on in different media in India, or if you looked at some other places? Have you done that? Has anybody had the time to look at that, and what have you found? I still don't know what actually happened. Maybe somebody could tell me what is the fact, if there is such a thing. Do you, Dipti, know what? Okay. Who wants to say what really happened, and did you find any inconsistencies or was it reported on from a particular perspective in different papers?
So there was a news about 5 activists were arrested as being alleged as being what is the name? No, I'm not going to know. So 5 activists were being arrested as they were connected to the alleged Maoist or Naxalites movement, that they were planning a murder plot against our Prime Minister Modi. So there were several newspapers and online media that reported that, and we found one news that its heading was something like crackdown on quote unquote urban Maoists, 5 quote unquote activists arrested over Bhima Koregaon violence, opposition cries foul. Okay, so there is something like in this heading, on the rest of the news, they were saying alleged activists, okay, or alleged Maoists. But here they have actually called them urban Maoists. No, the alleged word was removed from the heading, but it was present in the body but not in the heading. Another thing is that opposition cries foul. So now, who are the opposition? In this body of the report, by opposition they mean to say the CPM or Communist Party and all the other rest, and by opposition they mean to say it is showing the point of view of the government or the institutional agency who has I should tell the background of the news. Okay, yes. Okay, so there was an incident called Bhima Koregaon. So there Dalits were assembled, and there was a fight broke out between Dalits and the upper caste people, and because of that some people were arrested, and I forgot the name. So later the police found a letter, and there was the plot written over there, like a hatched plot of murdering the prime minister by these Naxalites or communist people, and these activists were supposed that they are the planners. Okay, so upon this allegation, these people's house were raided at the same time, at the same day. Okay, so these are the things how, I mean, on the basis of a letter, these people, these right activists are called urban Maoists and things like that. Another thing is that this 5 activists is also put on the court, and we know when we use scare codes, that means we are not, we're trying to distance ourselves from that term. So these are the things we just found out.
Yeah, and in the title it was written that like they were moist sympathizers without giving any check to it.
And one more thing, when the news item was describing the background event, that is the Bhim Koregaon incident, so the line read, Dalits clashed with upper class Marathas. So Dalits are supposedly the lower class people. Dalits clash, so they are giving the agency that it is them who clash with the so-called upper class. So when you're saying upper class, what are you telling about the others? So that is one thing. And then, yeah, the Maoist leaders were the Maoist ideologues, sympathizers, such kinds of words were used. That is a kind of ideology. It tells you what the reporters think about these people. And then most of the, when they were telling about the evidences, so the evidences came from sources. Now, who are the sources? We have no idea. So these are the things I noticed.
So if did you also think about how you yourself would have reported on this? How could one say things without taking a particular perspective? Is it possible at all? Is there such a thing as fact, or are these different understandings, and is it good, or would you, if somebody wrote these things, say in Argentina or something, would you then react to it differently and say, no, that's not what happened? You would like to rewrite it in a fashion that it would be not have too much sort of specific perspective.
Of course, it can be conveyed in a more objective way. Like when they are saying Dalits clashed with the upper class Marathas, there can be a thing like there was a clash, or a clash took place between Dalits and Marathas. There's no point saying upper class Marathas. And then when you are saying Maoist sympathizers, how do you know? It is what you think. And then when you say there was some other thing, urban Maoist, and then you don't need to use such labels. You cannot be a judge. Right. Then sources said, I guess this term of sources need to be, banned in the reporting, because it leads to a kind of a court-martial based on anything you want to say. You just attribute it to sources. Now, who are the sources? You need to tell them. So I guess a more objective approach and such kind of, adjectives given to people, they need to be a bit avoided.
These were the kinds of things that we wanted to do, basically. Yes.
One more thing. In the heading which read, can you give? Crackdown on urban Maoist. And no, that is not the heading. Crackdown on urban Maoist. 5 activists arrested over Bhim Koregaon violence. Opposition cries foul. Now you are giving voice only to the opposition and it is saying foul. What is the need of adding opposition cries foul? You could simply say what is happening. There is no point adding this extra clause to it.
Yes, thank you. So we'll when we get the money, we will employ you. No, but these are the kinds of things that we wanted to sort of address, and I see you are find the truth. Okay, you had a question here.
Not the question exactly. It is the same thing, the exercise you gave. There are 2 things which I have found. The one is like again a BBC report that paints India like in a very stereotypical image, and it says that 10 things that you must know about India before you visit, and it says that nobody pays income tax. The rise of the wedding detectives, these are their headlines. Home noise, and then everywhere you will find the plastic chairs, and everybody reads reused newspaper, and many more such thing, and they are piling on the pounds. These are their lines. A scourge of spit, and then there is a reporter, she will say the same thing in a two minute long bite. But other than that, there was another news that when India had an attack by a terrorist on its Taj Hotel in Mumbai. So there was a complaint from Indian embassy to UK media and especially to BBC because they did not use word terrorist. They said that this was a militant attack. So they avoided to use the word, and when the objections were raised, then they came up with the explanation that the terrorist has sometimes positive connotation in some part of the world, but whereas when the same thing happened and the attack was launched by the terrorist in some other European country, the choice of the word was different. It was terrorist attack. But in when India had that attack, then it was reported as. So that's how the manipulation probably takes place. That's what I wanted to talk about.
Well, you had me at no income tax already. I'm going to move here. You wanted to say something?
No, I wanted to say something about that previous thing.
Yes, yeah.
But maybe it's about everything in general.
Yes,
actually.
Yes.
No, I think that this exercise that you all are doing now is very important, and because, especially in this case, these pragmatic words now, it seems in the current situation, have a lot of, can have severe consequence. So, but then it's with social media added onto it, it takes on a lot of new forms. So in this case, there was this new term the government used, right, which you all mentioned, and that has been used in the reporting, but we don't know the basis for it. Urban Naxal or urban Maoist, right? Because before, Maoist was considered a rural and more like a tribal and for underdevelopment, but now they're using very sort of well-known intellectuals, people who have academic positions, who have worked a lot in this, and they call them this. So then the newspapers are trying to relate this in this pragmatic way. And so then this becomes both this, these pragmatic terms, by calling people that, can be the grounds for arrest now and total sort of deprivation of rights. And then on the other hand, because of these social media things similar to Me Too, there was hashtag Me Too Urban Naxal, which everybody started using in all of these various ways. So they're taking this pragmatic sort of circulation of this and reverting it. So then well-known people, students, everybody was sort of using it. So it has, so this is sort of, I think, history, like these pragmatic histories where media, social media, and what Jeff was talking about which is happening in India too, whereas labels can have some serious consequences here. The government names a label, and from that label they make the grounds of things like sedition or other sort of non-bailable offense, just using the pragmatics. And then social media creates a space where we can revert that too. So this whole pragmatics thing going on in relation to this case that they were mentioning is very, very interesting with relation to the talks that were given.
We called them and it gave them a sort of label, and once they had received a label that they were not refugees really, but that they were something else, then they could say, okay, according to this law, we don't let them in. So just figuring out the name or the label on it, then that gives you all the possibility of the legal status. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I chanced upon this article which was published in New York Times last November in 2017, and which linked sari, what Rukmini was wearing today, to Hindu nationalism, the traditional Indian attire, whereas the article completely misses out the point that sari as an attire has a more subcontinental appeal. It's worn in Sri Lanka, it's worn in Nepal, it's worn in Bangladesh. So it's a very narrow understanding of linking sari to a particular identity, and that too, looking in a very, very narrow framework. So I think that also needs to be revisited.
And these are these are of course the important things why Jeff and me wanted to have people sort of placed in India or wherever, so to sort of be able to talk about this. It was not the idea was not that Jeff and me would sort of look at what's happening in the world, but that we had people posted out over there to sort of go through and see what's going on, so that we could get towards peace. Let's put it like that. Was the
idea. It's about the Me Too movement. So one of our external state of ministers MJ Akbar was accused of many kinds of sexual harassment, and the ladies who accused him were well-known journalists, and they also narrated their whole story, and they also came forward. But on 17th October, Hindustan Times, it is written that, okay, I took it from Hindi newspaper, as you said that it should be Vanakunar. So it reads like, अकबर ने विदेश राज्य मंत्री के पद से इस्तीफा दिया, बोले मैं झूठे आरोपों को कोर्ट में करूंगा सामना. He said that it's saying that Akbar resigned from the post of the ministry, and he said that I will face the charges, like false charges. So again, it's written that, okay, he has resigned, and we should tell you, I am just translating, we should tell you that he was through Me Too movement he was accused. It is written through Me Too movement he was accused. The paper should have written that 15 journalists have gone against him, but it is saying that through Me Too movement he is accused. So, and nothing else it is written in the whole paragraph, only that what he said, that I will go to court and this and this. Only this line is about Me Too movement, and also it's saying like through Me Too movement he was accused. So we can see that in one way, on one way we are saying it a very strong movement and all, and we are they are themselves journalists, and media is reporting like this.
And that is, of course, really having to do with responsibility a lot, to who you give the responsibility to.
Just in addition to what she said, newspapers often, at least the newspapers I read, they omitted not only the names of the journalists, but also the length of the accusations and the story, whereas all of this was available on social media. So it's very interesting to see. So, she said that the paragraph had nothing but what MJ Akbar said, the minister. But it's, so sometimes what an analyst will observe, it can be read as omission of the women narratives, but it is also for certain kinds of responsibility, like, not to sensationalize whatever. So, the analyst has to make a step from just the observation to the reasons and all of that, right?
Did you find anything, Jeff, that on your...
No, when I type in things such as plot against Modi, only Indian media come up, and if I try to add a thing like The Guardian, where you would expect to find something like that, nothing at all.
Yeah.
So it didn't happen.
Exactly.
The plot against Modi didn't happen. According to international media, it's not there,
So I have a news reporting. It is regarding JNU. An incident happened in JNU in 2016, way back, that there were some students who were celebrating a birthday of one of their colleagues, and they were doing havan, kind of ritual like havan do there. So, but that is something that is not allowed to do in the hostels, and it is prohibited. Written there. So one of the wardens of the hostel, he got some information and student complaint against those 20-30 guys who were performing them, and then these wardens went with the security guard that you are not allowed to do that, and then there so this whole incident was reported in the media in a newspaper, so-called centralized Hindi newspaper, Dainik Jagran. So the quotation they used for the headline was, "Isai warden ne Hindu chhatra ko puja havan karne se roka." So they labeled that this is because the warden was a Christian. He did not allow the student to do the ritual or something like that. So that was very bad. This labeling, and then they put the religion there over there. So this was the case, like they should not have done this, or they could have rephrased, like there were some other newspaper reported they did not literally they did like this. So
well, thank you. Last one then.
Yeah, I took an old article, and it was after David Cameron gave an apology for the colonial history of Britain. It was in 2011. So BBC, this is a BBC article, and BBC takes two historians, and they say it relates to Jeff's, that page that he was showing that day about colonial history of India. Yeah, so it's in a similar line where they say that by the time British left India in 1947, they had given the subcontinent a number of priceless assets, including the English language, but also a structure of good government, local organization, and logistical infrastructure that it still holds good today. And then there are things like where they call, the war, the colonial war, they call it as a counter-insurgency. They use the term for, and then there is another author, that is Andrew Thompson, and he says that what you saw in the later stages of empire was a series of British counter-insurgency operations exported from one hotspot to another in places such as Kenya, Palestine, Malaysia, Zimbabwe, and of course Northern Ireland. The British were forced to resort to repressive legal and military measures in what was to prove an ultimately vain attempt to curb the tide of political unrest. So it's everything is legitimized in that way.
Well, thank you all. Of course, the newspapers also, they very well, or you should know that, of course, if you read a particular newspaper who is left-wing, right-wing, and so forth, then of course it is also their kind of expressed task or even duty they would feel themselves that to report on these things, on issues from their perspective, and that's that you can't think that there is a truth out there, but you need these different perspectives, and you need to at least monitor them in some way. And if there's anybody who has lots and lots of money to give us, then we'll continue this search for sort of establishing peace in the world, whatever. But we so yes, well, yes, we did we do that, by the way? Did we? Yes. But there is no cause and effect. It wasn't because of this that they passed away.
But the richest in this world are sellers of weapons.
What?
The richest in this world are those who sell weapons. So.
Georg Henrik von Wright has passed away. Edward Said, Umberto Eco, Bourdieu, but well, we're looking for new people. But it was really great. Okay. So this is what I found. This is the Swedish evening paper, one of the two big ones, and this is one of them. And this is the information on the train accident at the bottom of one page, and then you have a picture here, and then this is the text, and I just picked up some. So it said, I don't know this word, information, 50 dead in Indian train accident. And then said the victims are said to have stood on the tracks and watched fireworks when the train came. And again, they said not to have heard the train coming while they watched the fireworks. And then they sort of ended with, it's a very short thing, the Prime Minister describes the accident as heartbreaking on Twitter. My deepest condolences. It's sort of like Trump justification of why would have expected, I don't know anything about the Prime Minister, but I would have expected him to sort of say, okay, I'll take the first plane there and go and take care of people. But I don't know so this is what I read in a small thing, and it said 50, but now it's something like 68 the last I heard. But were they just standing there watching firework in these stupid people, or I know there must be something else. I'm sorry, but I mean it's the whole idea that if you as a Swedish speaker read this, you see, okay, why on earth did they go and stand on the train tracks? So there must be something else there to sort of justify going down, or somebody telling them, let's do that. And so these are the kinds of things that, as an innocent reader, and I say, oh, crazy, these Indians.
The thing stood on the tracks is factually wrong.
Yes. Okay.
It's just plain wrong.
Okay.
It doesn't matter, it's wrong.
Yeah.
But the whole thing is that there was a effigy of the Ravana being burned, and there were people gathered around it, and as it started to burn a lot, they moved away, and they spilled over kind of onto the track.
Yeah.
So it was not that they stood on it.
Yes, because it sounds as if, okay, it's a Sunday afternoon.
Mounted on a truck, extremely tall, very big. Yeah. And it started to topple. No, it started to burn. It was set to burn. And it went up in flames, and there were people all around, so just to avoid those, big flames, which were the wind presumably flowing in one direction. And that really crossed my way, and it ran away.
We have lots of time, but I'm just like what I mean. We have lots of time. We have time till 1:30.
Yes.
So
well, not more than half an hour, but maybe less. Yes.
But the point was the fact that the effigy was set to burn, and it was burning, and the wind was presumably blowing the flames in a particular direction. And so instead of going this way, people went that way. That way was the way that the train tracks were. And it must have been a curve, because otherwise they would have seen the train coming. Yeah, because of the sound, they could not hear the train coming. That's right, and it probably came round the curve.
Yeah.
So it didn't seem that that's another issue.
Okay, it's Friday afternoon soon, so I'll just get to the end of this, and then we can discuss further. Yes, well, okay. I shouldn't do these things, but there's so many things because I'm not the interruptive guy. But identity is one thing that I remember Jeff talking about. That okay, the not monolingualism kind of thing, but I'm just thinking again that you can't sort of rule identity out of language completely. I mean, if you start with identity, then you do feel, who are you, that you do want to say something about the language you speak. It's not sort of, this is an area where we speak this language and therefore you have to learn that language in order to be there, but your personal identity does connect up to language quite strongly, at least from where I come from. So that's just a note there. And well, Jeff talked about the weren't you here about the Flanders and the sort of I can't even remember the details about it, but that the right, yeah.
The point is, yes, language is part of identity, but it is as much part of the identity of speakers of minority languages
Yes.
than of the societal majority.
Yes.
And it is by majority not seeing that of course all kinds of tensions are created and the wrong kinds of decisions are made.
Yeah. Yes. No, I'm just I'm trying, okay, this was a kind of a way to get into the kinds of things that I've been looking into with respect to identity, and again, the migrants' identity when they come into a community. And in my case, it has to do with the linguistic challenges and other things that migrants face when they come to a new homeland. And in particular, we have been interested in looking at migrants coming into a rural area, the kinds of places that I showed you where you speak a dialect that is not understood outside that community. So I thought this might be something that you could also relate to. I don't know how about migration here and so forth, except for the old things and what's happening now. But we tried to, well, we started a project that we call Language and Integration in Rural Areas in Sweden and in Swedish language Finland, because as I said, in Sweden there are lots of people coming in, and whereas in Finland not a whole lot. And so we wanted to see how they construct their identity in these rural areas, because we'd heard so much bad things about what problems they have when they go to the big cities. And everybody seemed to be so happy out in the rural areas, and we wanted to find out, is this really the case? And I'll just show you a little bit, because that also, well, I'll see what I have here. So we're looking at this integration in the periphery, small rural communities, and again taking into, well, talking about the sort of way to organize projects and so forth. We, as I said earlier, used focus group studies and interviews and so forth, trying to include all the traditional local population, old and new one, people talking to them, what is their view of what's happening in the community, a small community at the moment, immigrants, first and second generation, newly arrived, guest workers, all kinds of migrants, also people coming from the United States and setting up a little shop there and so forth, trying to sort of include everyone, also administrators, politicians, teachers and so forth. So we try to get a holistic view of what's happening in the village and see how people sort of, well, what they react. And of course the interviews and the focus tapings that we have been extremely interesting. You know, the local, traditional local population, people said, no, everything's fine, and then one said, well, there was this one incident, yes, but everything's beautiful, we don't have any problems, and they always come back to this, yeah, except for that incident, of course. And so rather than then as an interviewer they said, oh, what incident was that? You let them talk, and because they will get back to the incident and they will say what it's all about, because they do want to say it, even though they don't really want to say it, because they don't want to be seen as not welcoming all the people who come in. And it's by then looking at the narratives and the stories and how what kinds of words they use, you get a sense of what's really going on in the community. So let's see now. Okay, so we're here again. We're in Närpes, this thing, you already know this place, and this is where we've done field work in this part, but this case is from Närpes, and that's one of a very typical 100% Swedish language community. Nobody spoke Finnish there. We didn't. I'm not from the community, but it's the same as the community that I'm from. Nobody ever heard Finnish. It was not something that we needed for anything. We were. It's like being in Flanders, and you don't need to. Well, you probably, well, you don't need to know French except when you go to school and become a little bit older and want to get a job and so forth. And then there was this sort of Närpes model for integration that sort of became very successful, that, you know, people who came there got work, they got housing, they got a place to stay, they got support for every family that came in. We had 3 other families in the village who took care of them and always visited them every 3rd day and showed them around and so forth. And this was a really important thing, because, and that's why they call it now the Närpes model, that is people are trying to implement in other places, trying to include really the community as a whole in what was going on. I won't go into details about this, but linguistically, as I've said, maybe that if you come to a Swedish language rural area like this, you need to learn the standard variety of Finland Swedish. That is, you get 1 year of teaching of that, and after that, that's it. Then you're supposed to take care of yourself. The different local dialect, and Närpes in particular has a dialect that nobody else understands if you're not from the area. I mean, the standard speakers don't. But that they have to pick up by themselves, learning how to buy milk or whatnot in the shops. And then if you go outside the Ostrobotnia area, you need to know Finnish. But that's not something that gets taught to migrants, because there's a general feeling that Finnish is very difficult for Swedish speakers, Swedish is very difficult for Finnish speakers. They aren't really, but that's the general idea that you live within. So if you get a migrant coming into a Swedish community, you do not want to force them to learn Finnish, because all our kids have problems learning Finnish. And that's one of the things that the migrants themselves say, that, hey, if we can learn Swedish, we can just as well learn Finnish. Why don't you let us learn Finnish? So these are again things that you, as a living in the community, impose on what you think migrants are capable of learning and whatnot. So at the end I've done this work together with Lena Ekberg from Sweden, but we then decided also, because there were always, when we were talking about these things, there were always a lot of issues that came up that for you are of course well known, but we actually in one article set up sort of 7 points like this. Okay, immigrants and newly arrived do not need labels, because whenever we talked about it, there was always somebody, but what do we call them? And they said, hey, this is not the main issue, these are people and blah blah so forth. And the thing about integration, that doesn't mean assimilation, and that they bring new knowledge, and migrants have the same capacities, cognitive and so forth, and both carriers of culture and instruments, and an important part of integration is mutual acceptance, and contact with the language and culture of the home country is important. Now, you know all of these, but it was important to sort of spell it out, and I see this as also a kind of taking responsibility, and this was addressed to the general public. So say, okay, this is what I, as a having some knowledge of language anyway, as an expert on language, need to say to the ordinary people sort of in the villages and so forth, that, and maybe nobody reads it, but at least you try and you can sort of talk at different places about these things. Okay, so what we did, this has to do with identity construction then, and I think, well, I do want to go this. So we used Homi Bhabha's third space notion to understand the identity construction that the migrants who came into this rural village were sort of faced with. So there were, of course, those who were almost fully integrated, but they weren't really, because they felt bad that they weren't speaking Bosnian to their kids. There were those who didn't want to integrate, but at the same time were angry at their kids, and who didn't want to learn the dialect of Swedish. So there was no really the extreme types. But then we found sort of 3 different types: the mediators, and then things that we called the doubly or triply marginalized, the immigrants, and then we find the immigrant identity of people who aligned with other people who came from the same place and settled elsewhere in the world, and kind of, created an imagined kind of community with sort of other migrants in the diaspora. So I was not sure to what extent I would do this, but well, this has to do with the identity can't be described in either or terms, and again coming into the dialect as a place rather than a space. And but I and this is important also, even though the migrants then who came in there learned the dialect together with their peers, they felt that the dialect was not theirs, that it was, the dialect was for the traditional local population, that was their possession. So I'm going to say this even though we want, because it has to do with how we work with narratives and so forth. So I want to give you as an example also for methods that I want to throw in here. So very simply, we're using Michael Bamberg, Anna De Finas, Alexander Georgakopoulos and other people's notion of narratives, and how you have like different positionings in the narrative that you can find out, especially in the small stories, not really in the life stories is one thing, but in the small stories that come in now and then when you talk, and then you remember something about your grandmother, and those small stories are the things that you should pay attention to. And I'll show you just one case of this to illustrate what it is. So at one level, the characters in a small story are positioned in relation to each other, to the people who were part of the thing that's being told about. And at another level, the storyteller positions him or herself in relation to the story as he or she tells it to the people who listen to him or her telling the story. And then at the third level, the storyteller positions him or herself in relation to dominant social discourses and the context around it. So this is just a tool to sort of look at positionings in different ways and to get some order into what's going on. I'll show you Anna's story in a while. This is a story. The setup was 5 Bosnian women who had come to Närpes in the early 90s. That they were actually one of the first people who Finland accepted as sort of migrants. There had been some people in the early 70s, but they went away because nobody wants to be in Finland. But 3 of them that I want to look at is Anna, who says then that we cannot let us be integrated 100%. Leila, who sort of adapted, and she says that the Närpesians see me as a Närpesian. They can say, oh, those Bosnians, but they don't mean me. You're not the same. So those are the sort of 2 extreme cases in a way. And then there are, so we can put them in here, like Närpesian, Bosnian here, adaptation resistance, and we have Leila there who's almost completely a Närpesian, and Anna who's not really, doesn't really want to be integrated. But then something happened there. Okay, there's now Anna's story, and I'll read it to you in the English version here. It says, Anna says, okay, and this is the one who was the oldest one and doesn't want to integrate. She says, some 2 weeks ago, Ivana and myself went for coffee and cake or something, but I saw a soup, and now I wanted to eat soup. So I asked, is there pork in this soup? Oh yes, okay. So we go and have a look at their cakes, and I was showing Ivana, and then she, from the other side of the counter, said, but there's no pork in these. And Anna said, in a cake? It's sort of... And I said to Ivana, now, we're getting out of here. I don't want a coffee and I don't want anything. No, mommy, no, don't, come on. No, I don't want any. I know myself that cakes don't have pork. So she took this as a real, instance that, if you're a foreigner and you come there and you don't understand anything, and so you have to be told that there's no pork in a cake. And so she was really offended by this. Now, in this story, then Anna feels offended, takes a strong sort of we versus them position, and Leila is totally accommodated to all this. But then we have Zlata, and she sort of puts herself kind of in the middle and expresses a need to, at least momentarily, align with the non-Bosnian view, and says that, well, pork is a sensitive issue. And she says, I think, because we come like this, and then she pretends to look at this. Is this pork? Is this pork? And and maybe if we could like ask in a different manner instead. Excuse me, could you explain what is in the soup? And then, you know, because we come like this, is this pork? And then we stand there and shake our bodies and so forth. So she takes sort of role of a fictive mediator between the main characters in her story. And in that way sort of creates a different kind of identity than Anna or Leila in this. And the ability to be a sort of third position stakeholder who can take on different positions in this way is a resource that you know, that you can have in a new country and searching for a place or searching for an identity of it. And then when we looked closer at this well, third position of ambivalence as sort of being both Bosnian and Nerpesian and so forth, it's a very sort of resourceful strategy to take and to have. And if we then look at the second generation Bosnians, they also kind of are mediators between a Nerpes identity and a Bosnian identity that they have inherited from their parents. So they already have a kind of third position identity that the parents have created for them. But they also manifest attitudes that are, well, show different ways of taking up this third position. So we have Luca, who was 22 years in 2015, and he feels very, you know, doubly marginalized, and he talks about, you know, I was just a foreigner when he came. It doesn't matter whether I live in Finland or go home, I'm a foreigner. And at the same time, he says, he's been in Bosnia and he doesn't like it there, and I just want to go home to Finland. So basically the use of home for both of these sort of, he feels that both are home, but he's not really part of either one of them. He affiliates himself rather with the immigrants in general. He says that he belongs to the ghetto there, and he's the outsider, he will always be an immigrant, and so forth. And Katarina and Dragana, they were 17 when we made this recording, and she feels like she's a Bosnian Nerpesian, and culture is a mixture and so forth. And then she says that sometimes when I'm with my Nerpesian friends and socialize with them, sometimes then I then take the chance to tell them also a bit about our culture. But there is a gap then between her as an adolescent with a Bosnian background and an Nerpesian adolescent. There's also a difference. What I noticed that after she changed to Vasa, the nearby town, then in some ways it's been much better there. But none of these three identify with sort of with the new Bosnians who come in. They have already created a space for themselves, so when new Bosnians come in, they don't really feel that they belong to them either. They have their own sort of third positioned identity, and they identify themselves with neither the Nerpesian adolescents or the Bosnian adolescents, but with adolescents whose parents have emigrated from Bosnia. And Katarina says here, we meet people like ourselves who feel the same way as we do. Yeah, exactly, said Dragana. Those who are from other countries, they have the same problems as we do, and then we identify with them. And this is what I wanted to show then when Luca, when he talks, he sort of turns to other immigrants in the social periphery of the village. The ghetto, as he calls it, Katarina and Dragana orient themselves away from the village and even away from Finland, identifying themselves with immigrants, with adolescents who have similar experiences of growing up in the diaspora. And then, of course, being a linguist, you also have to find linguistic features and indications of this. I just want to show you that, yes, we do that too. So here are just some, well, ways of indicating the negator with int or it. the diphthongization is different in the immigrants and the immigrant, and the broadness of the pronunciation and retroflexation and the use of the pronouns. So that's why it's good to be a linguist, because you can see that it's not just something that I make up, but I see that they use different linguistic expressions for saying basically the same thing, for what word you use as a negator. And this is now basically the same thing that I said, that we've interpreted Baba's notion of third space as a third position, characterized by uncertainty about where you belong, but as a strategy in the process of identity construction. And these are the three things then we had in addition to the extreme cases. And that's, I said also there, late modern fluid identities characterized by ambivalence and hybridity, strategies they employ in attempts to find social belonging in their new community. So, and I'm just about to finish, and then so this was, I've illustrated a couple of methods also that we use, and of course the linguistics also that you did here when you went through the texts, that you do need linguistic knowledge and know what the alternative is, the choices that journalists make, and that the choice is kind of whether they are subconscious or not, that migrants come or make. But I wanted to finish with this because both the right wing and the left wing and also the open versus closed society are pretty static, if you want to, having to do with ideology, which is misspelled here. So you should really, what would it look like if we looked at societies as being either responsible or not responsible? So Popper should write the enemies of the responsible society or something like that, and try to sort of think what happens if we change the course from doing discourse analysis from a point of view of ideology to including also doing discourse from a responsibility perspective, and then make our analysis more dynamic. That's what I'm kind of trying to do. Well, we'll see, and see what you say. And so if you change the focus of research even just a little bit in this direction, we can change a whole arsenal of questions that can be asked. And even to the extent that not simply focus on agentivity, but agentivity, the dynamic, the continuously changing, kind of defines the focus of what we want to do. So I'm trying to think about putting responsibility in the censor as a tertium comparationis, either instead of ideology, that will be very difficult, but in addition to ideology as a revised concept of ideology, where the dynamic who is responsible becomes the focus. Finally then, what is the next step for a linguist who wants to make the world a better place? Where do we start? I said this is a little programmatic, but one alternative really is to turn everything upside down and see what happens. And that's why I wanted you also to read thing about positive discourse analysis or Rukmini's emancipatory pragmatics, to instead of doing critical, which is often seen as negative, critical discourse analysis, take a positive approach and see what you can do positively with it. Don't ask me how to do it, but the article that I asked you to read, that was written by Martin, is well, it's an example of, it's not a good article, but just see, there are people out there who want to be more positive than critical, and we talked about that a lot also with emancipation and the post-colonial things that Rukmini has talked about. But I think it's in general the importance of taking alternative peripheral perspectives into account whenever you're doing social science and humanities research. And just to remind you once again, International Pragmatics next conference is in Hong Kong 2019. If you don't have anything else to do, come to Hong Kong. The theme there is Pragmatics of the Margins. Together with Yoshiko Matsumoto, I have a panel there that's called Identity Perspectives from Peripheries, where we try to find, is there anything in common in all the alternative perspectives which could give us a different understanding of, among other things, language, language use, and discourse. And then from language as power to power as language, because usually you say things like that, this language as power, that means that you know what power is. But we don't really. I mean, since we're getting closer, because we are the experts, we're getting closer and closer to a really important and a deep understanding, with all the explicit and implicit and all the things that Jeff talked about of language, then we can use this understanding as a tool to understand other aspects of life, like power. I know this is programmatic, but this is how I see it. And through understanding of how language works, we can take responsibility for seeing to it that, you know, intolerant, all-dominating practices of power are not allowed to take over. And this is why I think that initiatives like the ICM are important, once again. Alternative perspectives have to be admitted, and that can best be done through understanding of how language and languages work. I really think language has something to offer here. And then we understand which we're armed against unforeseeable challenges, and we can explain everything. This is my last slide. It just says that, okay, all I talked about language, specifically languaging, is variable, varied. You know, the only thing constant in language is constant change. A language that doesn't change is a dead language. It's adaptable, it adapts itself to new situations, and this capacity for accommodation is also applicable to language use, but language is restrained in some way, and that's why I think it's good also to have knowledge of grammar as a resource, as the resources we have access to, and not forget about this. I say here at the end, this beauty in an all-encompassing golden middle road in our search for getting a deeper understanding of language and language use. Thank you.